don't try and shake me. I've been so patient lately. I'm just everything you want to be, to be. Every now and then I smell fire burning. It's like the earth ain't turning. I'm just everything you want to be, to be. Now I'm just coming alive. Baby, I'm coming alive. Yeah. Now I'm just coming alive.
Hello. Thanks for tuning in to kayFM podcast. That was Coming Alive by To Another. To Another, I actually am not gonna lie, I don't know much about. I only know one other song, and that is Keeping Me Under. And to be honest, I was actually going to use Keeping Me Under as the intro song, but I actually just recently discovered Coming Alive, and it's been added to my workout playlist, and I felt like it was kind of fitting for the space that I'm in right now. So anywho, we are getting back into it. Today's topic is actually about reverse culture shock, which was a concept that I felt like I wasn't sure if I quite believed in it until I actually experienced it. So, by definition, what reverse culture shock is reverse culture shock, also known as re-entry shock, which I've never heard it called that, but is the feeling of disorientation and readjustment experienced when returning to one's home culture after living abroad. And yes, I would go ahead and say that is currently what I'm experiencing. So last week was definitely a super rough week for me. I think probably the 1 week where I felt kind of like an emotional turmoil. And there was a lot going on last week, astrologically speaking. I mean, there was 8/8 portal. After that was the full moon in Aquarius. The day after that was my official 1 month back to US. And then the day after that, I believe that Mercury was no longer in retrograde, so it's stationed direct. So there was a lot going on, astrologically speaking, and that is what I'm going to blame it on. The energy was kind of crazy, and not to mention, I also got my period last week, so that week that I know I'm going to get my period, I start to get like super sensitive, super emotional, as one does. So last week, I tried to record this episode, and when I went to go and edit it, I literally was like, yeah, no, I cannot edit this shit because my thoughts were all over the fucking place. So now here I am re-recording this episode. And I am happy that I'm deciding to re-record it because I felt like I was like super disoriented last week, where I have a better grip on the conversation this week. So, reverse culture shock. I think that kind of ties into just like where I'm at right now, especially having, I think I'm now like almost 5 weeks into being back. And I felt like the first couple weeks of returning was more distracting for me in the way that I was busy. Like, you know, I was catching up with family, catching up with friends, getting reacquainted with Chicago, getting reacquainted with the suburbs. It feels different because even though I came back last year for a few months, last year when I came home, there was an agenda. Like, I had things I needed to do. There were weddings I had to go to, you know, people I had to see. I was only here for X amount of time, and then I was going to Los Angeles. And I was kind of traveling a lot within that period of time within the US, where this time around, it's like, no, you're settling here. You're finding new roots here. And so it's definitely a way different pace. And so the first few weeks, I feel like my mind was busy. And now that the dust has settled, it's definitely feeling more daunting, but exciting. There's definitely like a duality to it where it does feel heavy and it does feel scary, but also at the same time, it's very exciting and there's a lot of opportunity. So today I kind of just like wanted to get into what was life like living in Manila versus to what life is like now having returned back to the US. So, what was life like living in Manila? So to get into that, I actually want to just like briefly kind of go over what life was like when I left LA, because it kind of ties into where it was at when I decided to move to Manila. And so that last year that I was in LA, that I would say was the first year I had really dove into what it meant to live a slow life. I think by that point in my life, I was super burnt out. And it wasn't just like from one job, it was like continuous burnout, job after job. And so at that time, I knew that I wanted freedom with my time. Like, I wanted to work, but I wanted to do work on my own time, and I wanted to still be able to have space for a personal life. And so that last year living in LA, I had a super cush life in some ways. let me backtrack, because I loved my schedule. My schedule was super dope. Like, and here's the thing is that I want to preface this by saying that I had an awesome schedule because I created it that way. And by creating it, that required me to make sacrifices. And like some of those sacrifices was making a lot less money than I had been. And so at that point in my life, and I'm not saying this is actually a belief that I have outgrown, but at that time in my life, I felt as if I needed to sacrifice making more money to allow myself to experience more of my personal life, where I don't actually believe that's the truth anymore. But, you know, that was also two and a half years ago. So I chose to wake up early every morning. So in the mornings, I would wake up and I would go to the gym like almost immediately. So I was going to the gym at like 5:30, 6 a.m. And then I would go to the gym, I would come back, and I would make myself breakfast. I would have some tea. I would do some writing in the morning, maybe even just like listen to some music. And then probably around 11ish, I want to say, I would do work for my clients. So from like 11 to 4, I was doing freelance work usually. And because I was able to work remotely, I was either working out of my apartment that I absolutely loved, or I was visiting like coffee shops and doing work there, which I also love to do. And then after working, I would go to a park. I would do some reading at a park, and then I would come home and I would make dinner. And then I would wind down, I would light candles, and I would put a record on, and then I would meditate, and then I would go to sleep. My do not disturb was on by like 8 p.m., 9 p.m., and I was like in bed by 10. And I loved it. I loved that schedule. Like, it was so much fun. And like, you know, within that, it was like, maybe I wasn't always going to a park and reading. Maybe I was like going to the beach and rollerblading, or I was going on a hike. There were days where I would take a break in between clients, and then I would, you know, drive out to Runyon and go for a hike for an hour. And I loved that. It was like the first time in my life where I had experienced being able to balance work and a personal life and hobbies, and then also just like a healthy lifestyle, like working out and meditating, eating healthy. It felt really great, except except that because I was freelancing, I was working a lot less hours. I mean, I was working from like 11 to 4, so it's like 5 hours a day. So I was working like 25 hours a week. And I was not making as much as I was making at my previous job. So because of that, I was like barely making ends meet. And so even though I loved my routine and I loved my lifestyle, I couldn't fully be present in my life, and I couldn't really fully appreciate what was going on, because deep down inside, it was definitely this feeling of anxiety of, am I going to be able to pay my bills this week? Am I going to be able to make rent this month? You know, even like getting down to like, I needed to be smart with my groceries to make them last longer. And so when you have that worry and you have that anxiety and you're still in survival mode, even though my routine was what I wanted it to be, I couldn't appreciate it for what it was because I was still so worried all the time. And not to mention, not only was I worried about bills, I was still going through a lot of grieving at that point. And I was, in therapy, and I was in a space of isolation. Like, I wasn't hanging out with people really. I was barely talking to my family. And like a lot of my friends at that point were living in Chicago. And so it was also a very lonely period of my time. So, it had its pros and cons. But with that being said, I had already had a sense of what I wanted my lifestyle to be like. I knew like what I wanted my day-to-day to look like. And I crafted it that way because I did a lot of writing about what does my ideal day look like? And from there, I started to build on that. I was like, how can I make my day-to-day look like my ideal day-to-day with what I have now? And that is like really where I started to readjust and redesign my life, basically. So that being said, once I decided to leave LA, which the main reason for leaving LA was because I just couldn't keep up with the cost of living. And so I decided that I was going to go travel, and I went to Asia, which was only supposed to be a 3-month trip. And I ended up staying there for 2 years, basically. So why did I choose Manila? I will say the biggest factor is that the Philippines obviously is part of my cultural roots. It's funny, I don't know why, but when I had originally planned my Southeast Asia trip, the Philippines was not a part of it, which I don't know why I was kind of debating. So my original plan was Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and then I was either going to go to the Philippines or I was going to go to Bali. And I wasn't sure which between the two that I was going to choose. So basically, in Thailand, I decided that I was going to go to the Philippines. Also, at that point, I had a lot of family in the Philippines reaching out to me, knowing that I was in Asia. They were like, "Are you coming to the Philippines?" And I was like, "I don't know." At that point, I was like, "Okay, I feel like I need to go to the Philippines because I'm here." And I don't know what it was. I mean, maybe it was just, I kind of do, I guess, know what it was. But the minute I landed in Manila, I just knew. I was like, oh, like it didn't even matter that like coming out of fucking Naya airport was pure chaos. And like, it was so fucking hot. The air was super muggy. It was super polluted. There was something in that first day. I was like, oh, I love it here. I feel at home here. And I think it was also because, like, you feel at home in some sort of ways after being in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand. Like, even though, like, that culture is familiar to me because it's all Asian culture, you still don't have a sense of what's really going on because you don't speak the language. So half the time I'm like, I don't know what people are saying to me. And it can be very isolating because you're not really talking to anyone. You're not like making a ton of friends or anything. But it was such a, and you know, I had been traveling at that point for maybe 2 months. And so it was just funny to me because not a lot of people were really speaking English in those other countries. And so I just remember landing in Manila. I was like, oh wow, I know what everyone's saying. Like, you know, like even though they're not speaking English, even though like a lot of people in the Philippines speak English, but I just remember thinking to myself, oh my God, I understand what they're saying. I know what these people are saying. Because you're in such a space of being so used to just like wandering throughout the world without knowing what anyone is saying. Like, I don't speak fucking Thai or Vietnamese or anything, so I just got used to kind of just like being in my own world. And so getting to the Philippines, I was like, oh wow, I can understand everyone, and it feels like everyone is my family. Everyone reminded me of a family member. And so when I got to the Philippines, I just felt so at home, and I knew that I didn't want to go back to the US. And I had plans already to go back to the US. I was supposed to go back to the US after the Philippines. So me going back to the US, it was more so at that point. It was more so a decision out of obligation because I had things to do when I came back. I felt like it was very much so a turning point for me making that decision. And it was a huge decision to either go back to the US or stay in Asia. And I just remember there was a lot of turmoil that I was feeling because I had told my brother that I would watch the kids while they went to like a wedding. And so he had already like purchased like a ticket for me to go to New Orleans for this wedding. And then also at the same time, my best friend, she was about to have a baby. So, you know, I was supposed to be there for her baby shower. And it was like, these are, you know, two very important people in my life. And I like to show up for the people, obviously, that I care about. And so I felt so much guilt in that decision because I knew that I didn't want to go home. And I knew in my bones that like the right decision for me was to stay in Asia. It was like the first time really paying attention to my intuition and paying attention to what my body is telling me. And this is like such a huge lesson and something that I have had to learn to work with over and over and over again and get more familiar with the process of paying attention to myself and paying attention to what my needs are and paying attention to what is actually aligned for me. And it's not to say to not show up for others, but to show up for yourself first so that you have the space to show up for others. And so that was a huge turning point for me. And so come June, that was June of 2023, I decided that I was going to stay in the Philippines. And at that point, I was like, I'm going to give it like 6 months. So I decided to stay in the Philippines. And it wasn't easy, but it was also probably one of the greatest experiences that I've ever experienced in my lifetime. And it was so life-changing for me. What I mean by that is that, yes, I went through huge life shifts while I was in the Philippines. One of them being able to stand firm in my identity and to really show up authentically. When you remove yourself from an environment and you place yourself, I mean, in my case, I was placing myself in a completely different continent, I felt like it was so easy to just show up as someone different. It was being able to choose myself and be who I always wanted to be. I feel like it's hard to know what you truly want for yourself when there's so much outside influence going on around you. And it's funny because now looking back, at that time, I always kind of felt like, oh, I'm pretty independent. I make decisions for myself. I know what I'm doing. But in fact, she did not. And I mean that because when I was able to get away from everyone that knew me, and this is why I believe that I've been able to experience so much inner growth, is because I placed myself in isolation of outside of the people that knew me, outside of my like familiar environments. I had to figure out who I wanted to show up as. And so being in the Philippines, and you know, even though I was with family, this family it's not like family that's known me all of my life. And so all of these people were basically new to me. And then any friends that I made in the Philippines obviously hadn't known me prior to me coming to the Philippines. So it was like the person that they were getting to know at that time, they didn't have any past versions of me to go off of. So it was like if I set a boundary somewhere, that was their standard because that was the first time that they're getting to know me. Whereas opposed to like if you set a boundary with people that you haven't always set boundaries with, sometimes people will take offense to that boundary. And it can be hard to continue to enforce that boundary if you get such a pushback from it. So I felt like living in the Philippines, it was just so much easier for me to just like be me. I could choose myself. I could prioritize myself first. If I didn't want to do something, I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't going to do anything out of obligation. So not only was I able to show up authentically, I feel like that created space for me to stand more firm in my identity and who I wanted to be. Getting into things that like people wouldn't really expect me to get into, because it was like all of a sudden I was like reading books a lot, and I'm into poetry, and I'm like really into like being at the gym, which are all things that like I wasn't always into, or maybe was a part of my life but not something that I really nurtured over time. And so I was able to get into an environment where I could just focus on those things. I could just focus on the things that I wanted to do. And it was so fucking refreshing. It's like literally the best thing ever. And to make matters even better was that the cost of living in Manila is so much more doable than the cost of living in Los Angeles. And so getting back to what I was saying before was that I had built this routine and this day-to-day practice that I couldn't fully enjoy because I was so worried about being financially stable, that when I went to Manila, I was able to finally do that, and I was able to live within my means, and I didn't have to work 40 hours a week. I could comfortably work 20 to 25 hours a week and then still carry over that entire lifestyle that I had built over. But this time around, I could fully enjoy it and I could be present in it. And so getting out of survival mode with a mix of living true to yourself and being able to explore hobbies and personal interest and creative endeavors, it's a very, very healing experience. One experience that I just will never, ever forget. And I was gonna say you don't even know what's happening while you're in it, but for me, I'm a very reflective person that like I just remember like in my day to day, just feeling so grateful for being able to live this life without any sort of anxiety about it. And that was like the first time I had experienced like getting out of survival mode. I don't even know how to explain that feeling. To get out of survival mode, how much space it creates for you and how much energy it creates for you. I truly believe that like it's so hard to be present in your life when you're living in survival mode. Again, going back to like living in LA, even though that lifestyle I just like loved, there was like something always in the back of my mind that almost felt like I couldn't enjoy those things because like you're about to be late on your rent, or like how are you gonna, you know, feed yourself this week? You just there's this like fog over that appreciation of what was going on. So to transition to the Philippines and be able to live within my means and be so fully present in my life, it was life changing. It was literally life changing. And from there, I was able to just do so much work and work as in like internal work, which is, I feel like for me is the most important part for me. And, you know, it was a lot of discovering who I am and, you know, what do I want out of this lifetime? What do I want my life to look like? How do I want to show up for other people? These were all things that I was going through. And also, you know, like, what are my values and what matters to me? Because at this point, I'm now like stripped of everything, right? I had sold all of my things from LA. I'm living out of a luggage. Like, I'm very minimal in like my clothing pieces. My closet is like my luggage. Even still to this day, like that's like seriously how I'm living. But you strip yourself from everything. And you're like, okay, so like, who are you now? Like, that you don't really have anything, you know, all I have is myself. And it's such a starting point, and it's such a humbling place to be. So going to Manila, I was able to focus on that. I think a lot of people obviously were able to see what I was doing on the outside, my day-to-day basis, you know, like really being active. I was like super in the gym. I was taking dance classes. I was boxing. I was becoming part of communities. But while all that is happening, like, I'm able to like really get a hold of myself. I want to change this about me, and me deciding to change that. How am I going to show up as that person in my immediate reality now? And it was like almost like a testing ground for me to show up in the way that I wanted to show up. It felt all very experimental in some sort of way, because it was a lot of, you know, like new faces and new environments and a new version of me. And it was kind of testing out like what feels right to me. I don't know. It was a very cool experience. And I would say now the third biggest change for me as I was living in Manila was that the more I got comfortable with myself, the more I started to really feel comfortable in my own skin, that's when I started to like create community. And so I started to like meet new friends. I became a part of the dance community. I was really familiar with like the people in my boxing gym, like different boxing coaches, and even just like get acquainted with, you know, the people I would see at the gym every day. And so it was different in the way that I had been in a very isolating period, and then the stronger that I felt within my identity, the more safe I felt to kind of put myself back out there again. And I feel like that was like one of the best parts, was just like being able to be in community again and to find people who see you for who you really are and who you've become. You know, now being back, one of the hardest parts for me was leaving behind my friends, because it's like these are the people that I feel like really see me for who I am now. And you know, it's hard to keep up relationships when you're fucking in different time zones. That was one thing I definitely struggled with while I was in Asia. All in all, best things that ever happened to me while moving to Asia is that I got out of fucking survival mode. Going along with that, I regulated my nervous system. And let me tell you, game over. When you learn to regulate your nervous system, game over. Like, I can't even tell you, like, this is gonna sound like super, super, like, spiritual, like, kumbaya shit for you. But, like, the feeling of creating inner peace and being able to maintain that, or learning how to regulate your emotions when you get worked up over something, and not allowing what's going on the outside to affect what's going on the inside. Like, I can't tell you, as someone, I don't know if a lot of people know this about me, or maybe they do, but a bitch has anger issues. Like, I get worked up, dude. Like, I would say not so much anymore. I'm very calm, as opposed to like before, where I would just like be super triggered. I'm like, I'm gonna fuck this person up. And not even like, I mean, maybe physically, but I will fucking make them cry with words. Like, I would just get so worked up over shit. And so to like know how to control that now and not let people get under your skin, because like that's like the shit is like, people, especially like manipulative, toxic people that know how to get under your skin and then use that against you to get like a reaction out of you. The way to win that is to just be unbothered. At the end of the day, like, you just realize you can really empathize with people, especially like if people are acting shady towards you or like just really out of pocket. I almost want to be like, what are you going through? Do you need to speak about it? Like, do you need to talk about something? Because I'm here to talk things out with you, because you are acting bogus as fuck right now. But like, you just start to realize that it's not really about you. And so, sorry, going back to it, regulate your fucking nervous system. Learn how to regulate your nervous system. I swear, it, like, literally, just so much will happen for you once you learn that. So moving to Manila, getting out of survival mode, regulating my nervous system, learning to show up as who I am and not being afraid of that, like knowing who you are and standing 10 toes down in that, like, yes. And then creating community. I think that's like something I feel like now I'm going to go ahead and shift, but shifting back to the US is like, and I'll start with that, is that I think growing up as an American, it is super glamorized to be independent. And there's not a lot of sense of community here. I don't know. Everything just like feels like super solo dolo here. And whereas opposed to like, I don't know, it's just being in Asia and like, especially like experiencing like being able to go to like the smaller places, like the less structured places, like out in the provinces, and like, and not even just like in the Philippines, like I'm talking like when I was in Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand. It's just, community is such a huge thing, and it's so nice to have like a support system and have a village of people that is like there to help you. There's this thing that Trevor Noah talks about, and I'm gonna put that clip in here if I can find it.
Thing that I've found is the ultimate paradox of coming from a developed country versus a developing nation. You know, so first world, third world, is the thing that you're sold in developed nations is that you have everything. oh, it's great, the roads work and the schools are fantastic and there's healthcare and, you know, this is a great country to be in. The one thing that nobody seems to tell you is that as a country becomes more and more developed, the one thing that gets eroded is community.
Yeah, super unfortunate because community is like so important. One thing that now I am shifting back to, but also trying to change in my reality, because it's not to say that there isn't community. It's all about really finding the right community for you, where I haven't quite found the community yet, but I am realizing, like, as I've been able to kind of navigate what Chicago kind of looks like now, and I mean not even like in a physical sense, but like also looking at Chicago through different eyes. I'm like, what are the creatives doing out here? Which I've never looked at Chicago in that way. You know, what are people doing creatively here? What does the dance scene look like? Where are the Filipino owned businesses? Like, those are like all kinds of things that I'm like navigating with Chicago now. Where do I fit in? And where do I want to either create community, or where do I want to become a part of community? I think that a big shift in my mindset before I left the US, like when I was still living in LA, I was definitely in a space where it's like, I don't want to fuck with anybody. I'd rather just do shit by myself. And I did. And I will say that that period of my life was necessary. And it helped me in my solo travels, because I was doing so much shit solo, I was like going out to eat by myself. I was like going on road trips by myself, coffee shops, like hiking, you name it. I was doing everything on my own. So when it came to solo traveling, I was very comfortable just going out and doing things on my own. And that allowed me to really experience the culture and experience the country in a way that felt good to me, because I wasn't afraid to go do things on my own. I didn't have to fucking wait for anybody. But again, shifting back to like me coming back now, I actually want to find a community. I'm interested. One of the things I am excited about is that I get to find new community. I get to meet new people. And like, you know, thinking about how comforting and safe the people that I met in Manila and what they are able to do for me and the support that they showed me, it makes me excited. It makes me sad to leave and not be like in their immediate surroundings anymore. But it also makes me excited at the thought of being able to recreate that here in Chicago. So that is something I am like super excited about, but also still very scary. I mean, it still requires me to put myself out there. I still have to, you know, I have to push myself out of my comfort zone. So the contrast of it is that I got to experience all these really great things in Manila and discover a lot about myself that made me feel good about myself and feel proud about who I am. And I feel like some of those parts of me that were uncovered in Asia were parts of me that had been kind of shoved down or like buried, or that I just didn't nurture enough. And so it felt good to nurture those things while I was in Asia. But one of the hardest things is to reintegrate into a space where people do know the past versions of you. So like I was saying, like going to Manila, it made it very easy for me to show up as, you know, who I want to be and who I am. Whereas here, it's more about showing up authentically and being able to know yourself and enforce boundaries with an environment and with people who are not yet familiar with who you are today. So it can be hard, and it's easier to go back to how you used to be and to make other people feel comfortable than it is to enforce boundaries and show up differently and to go against the grain and have to force people to get reacquainted with who you are now. It's more difficult to do that, and it's easier to fall back into who you've always been. And I think that is where the true test lies for me. How do I stay firm in who I've become while living in the Philippines? And how can I come back here and stay true to that person, but also at the same time honor my roots and honor where I came from? And it's not like the old parts of me are completely gone and I'm just completely someone new. How do I teach the people that care for me and love for me to create space for this person that I am now, who may not be exactly the same as they remembered? And it's also difficult, more difficult, because it's been 12 years since I've lived in Chicago. So I would say that coming home to, even though like when I was living in LA, I would come to Chicago and visit at least once a year. But, you know, a lot changes within just 1 year, right? And so to shove in time with X amount of people within the 10 days that I would come home, it doesn't allow people to really get to know you or get to know who you've been. It's more so just about catching up, right? You don't really get down and dirty into the real parts of it. So now we're looking at, not only did I shift so much while I was already in the Philippines, but there's also the 10 years of shift while I was living in LA that people are not super familiar with too. And so it definitely is hard. It's hard, and it is very much so an act of self-love to place your needs first and prioritize yourself and to set boundaries, because the reality is when we set boundaries, it's in favor of everyone. I'm doing this because I love you and because I need this space for myself, because I also love myself, you know. But going along with that, I wanted to close this off with why I decided to leave Manila and why I'm back in the US, which so many people have asked me. So one thing for me when I was living in Manila, for one, and I will take this as a sign because I take everything as a sign, but there was a point where I felt like Manila was going to be my spot. Like I really felt like I was going to live in Manila for an extended period of time, which I did. I was there for like 2 years collectively, but I thought it was going to be longer. What I wanted to do is I wanted to apply for dual citizenship. And I had tried to the last time I came home, but turns out, for any Filipinos out there that are looking to apply for dual citizenship, I don't actually qualify for dual citizenship, because at the time of your birth, at least one of your parents has to be a Filipino citizen in order for you to get like grandfathered into dual citizenship. So funny enough, when I was born, my mom had already been an American citizen, but my dad became a US citizen literally a month before I was born. So he renounced his Philippine citizenship. So I don't actually qualify for dual citizenship. So because I don't qualify for dual citizenship, what I've been doing is I've been extending my tourist visa, which can be kind of annoying because you can extend your tourist visa for an extended period of time, but you cannot leave the Philippines if you extend it for a longer period of time. And because I was still kind of traveling within Asia while still living in the Philippines, I didn't want to extend my visa for that long. So I was only extending it for like 2 months at a time, which requires me to go to the immigration office every couple months, and spend, 4 hours of my day commuting there, waiting in line, and processing the paperwork, and then commuting back. Like, it's a thing. So I was kind of getting tired of having to re-extend my visa all the time. Was one of the hassles that made me want to leave. But two, I also personally felt like I was in a space of feeling like I was getting ready to leave. And what I mean by that is that I really lived, like, my experience living in Manila and living in the Philippines, I felt like was a very fulfilling experience. I felt like I really lived as a local. I got to be part of communities. I saw a lot of different places while I was in the Philippines. I feel like I really took advantage of the time that I was in the Philippines. I felt good about leaving Manila, and I knew that because I couldn't apply for dual citizenship, I knew that Manila was going to have to come to an end at some point. And so I had been kind of feeling like I was like getting really comfortable in Manila, but I felt like there are so many big things that I want to accomplish in my life. And I was feeling too comfortable in Manila. And so, knowing who I am, I felt like I needed to push myself out of my comfort zone. And by doing so, that meant like me coming home back to the US. And what I really want to close it up saying is that what I'm now realizing and what I'm now unpacking is that I think for a long time I was afraid of coming back to the US because when I think about my life when I used to live in the US, when I lived in Los Angeles, I think about being in survival mode. And I remember how difficult it was. And I remember the cost of living. And so I think that I have been avoiding coming to the US in fear of going back to that place. The reality is that so much has changed within me that at the time that I felt like I was ready to come back to the US, it was an entire mindset shift, and that I can create the life that I want regardless of where I am. And I think once I was able to realize that, it felt safer for me to return back to the US. And so I feel like it's been such a huge survival mode, scarcity mindset shift that I have been unknowingly working through while I've been in the Philippines. And because of everything that has happened in the Philippines, for me, I feel confident and stronger enough to come back here and recreate the life that I wanted to live when I was living in LA, and now I can recreate it here because there's so much more that I know about myself, and there's so much that I've learned. And in terms of redesigning your life, recreating your life, in terms of manifesting, and in terms of like aligning yourself with the life that you want, there's so much that I want to unpack. And I had to do it in a place where I could build some stability. And I couldn't build stability in the Philippines because, yeah, I'm sure there were other ways I could maybe look into it, but I'm not a citizen there. I'm not authorized to work there. And so, and end game, what I've always wanted for myself is to always obviously have a space here in the US. I never really knew exactly where, but to have a home base in the US and still travel throughout my life. And that's always been the bigger picture for me. And so I feel like now is that time. And now I'm finally at that space where I have the confidence. I have a regulated nervous system. My anxiety levels are a lot lower now. I'm getting sleep. I'm getting back to my workout routine. I'm focusing on my creative projects, and there's so much that is so different about my life, and there's so much that's so different about me coming back this time around. And so yeah, even though life is not perfect right now, I told you in the last episode, I'm living with my parents, I'm 35 years old, I don't got a job, but all in all, life is exciting right now. I'm in an exciting place to be. I feel like I'm in the beginning stages of something really great. So that is where I'm going to leave off this episode. I will catch you next week, hopefully. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you.